Just at the minute, I'm in rehearsals for a play called Educating Rita by Willie Russell. Anybody remember Educating Rita? Yeah, quite a few people. Well, there's a bit in that play where Frank, the tutor, is talking to Rita, and he's explaining to her why he's let her struggle and struggle and struggle to try to understand Howard's End, E.M. Forster's novel. And he says to her, "I could have explained it to you earlier, but you'll have a much better understanding of something if you discover it in your own terms." Now, as Lewis has already said, we're going to be, over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at some of the questions Jesus asked of people. And it always seems to me that maybe one of the reasons why Jesus asked people those questions was to make them think and to make them discover things in their own terms, as Frank put it. So this morning, we're going to be thinking about one of the questions Jesus asked. It's the question that Jesus asked of Mary Magdalene. Who is it that you're looking for? But before we look at that question, I want to take a step back and ask a different question. Who was Mary Magdalene? You see, back in the year 591, Pope Gregory the Great preached a sermon in which he identified 3 incidents in the Gospel. Firstly, Luke lists a group of women who had been cured of evil spirits and infirmities who followed Jesus. And Luke names one of those as Mary Magdalene and tells us that 7 demons had gone out from her. Then there's another incident recorded by Luke in which a sinful woman enters the house where Jesus is eating, bathes his feet with her tears, then dries them with her hair, and finally anoints them with oil. And then John's Gospel records a very similar incident to the one described by Luke, but this time John tells us that it occurred at the house of Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. And John tells us that it's Mary, the sister of Lazarus and Martha, who anoints Jesus' feet with oil and wipes them with her hair. And so in his sermon, Pope Gregory said that these 3 incidents described the same woman. In other words, Mary Magdalene is Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. She's a repentant sinner who's been cured of 7 devils. And that, from that moment on, became the accepted position of the Western Church. Now, it has to be said that the Eastern Church had already separated from the Church in the West, and they tended to view these 3 incidents as relating to 3 separate people. But for 1,000 years, that position in the Western Church remained unquestioned. And then, with the coming of the Reformation, that view began to be challenged. It has to be said that Luther stuck to the view that all those 3 incidents describe the same person, Mary, whereas Calvin thought that they were 3 different people. More recently, feminist theologians have seen a different Mary. They point to the evidence that's in the Bible, in the Gospels, the fact that Jesus revealed himself to Mary first, before the other disciples. And using that and drawing on other passages in the Bible and other early Christian writers, they suggest that Mary was a disciple who was at least as important as any of the male disciples. And that becomes a very important argument in those parts of the church where there is debate about the position of women priests. Some have taken this a step further by suggesting that Mary was actually Jesus' wife. You may be familiar with Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code, which is, of course, a work of fiction, but in that, the idea is presented that Mary was Jesus' wife. But there have been some attempts to explore that idea by serious theologians, though it has to be said that they don't necessarily represent the mainstream of Christian thinking. The fact that there are such different views has allowed people to create many different images of Mary. If you accept that she is the sinful woman recorded by Luke, then Mary can stand for those people who feel that they have been rescued from their past lives. That particular view of Mary became particularly important in 19th century England when prostitution came to be regarded as one of the greatest problems in society. Mary became the model of the fallen woman rescued by Jesus, and houses for reformed prostitutes were called Magdalene houses. If you separate Mary from that woman, then she can appear as a very pure and very saint-like figure, perhaps a model of the ideal for Christian women. If, like other theologians, you accept that Mary was at least as important a disciple as the men, then that's a very powerful argument. A powerful argument for destroying the patriarchal structures that have applied in the church in the past and continue to apply in the church today. In many ways, it's frustrating that we don't know more about who Mary was. But it seems to me that that's what makes her so relatable. There's something in Mary that can speak to each one of us. So now let's return to the question Jesus asked. Who is it that you're looking for? And perhaps you think that the answer's obvious. Mary was looking for the body of Jesus. But because his body wasn't where she expected it to be, she was looking for whoever could tell her where it was. But like so many of the questions Jesus asked, there's a surface meaning and a deeper, more significant meaning. When Jesus asked Mary who she was, who she was looking for, he knew that she was looking for his dead body. But it seems to me that the deeper question Jesus was asking is, who did Mary think that Jesus was? And our answer to that depends very much on who we think Mary is. If she's the former prostitute, then perhaps Jesus is the one who showed her love when respectable people shunned her. Perhaps more significantly, Jesus is the one who saved her from her past and brought her back into a relationship with God. If Mary is the woman Luke describes as being cured of 7 demons, then perhaps Jesus is the person who drove those demons out. In today's way of seeing things, we might say that he brought her back to sanity. And the Jesus she is looking for is the one who has the power to heal people like her. If Mary was closer to Jesus than the other disciples, even possibly his partner in his ministry, then perhaps Jesus is the person who gave women dignity, equality, and self-respect in a patriarchal society. And perhaps the Jesus that Mary was looking for was a combination of all of these and more. But the one thing we can be fairly certain about is that at that time, Mary was not looking for a Jesus who had overcome death itself. And it was only when Mary came face to face with that reality that she realized he was so much more than the person she'd been looking for. So what about us? When we come to Jesus, who are we looking for? There will almost certainly be some of us who are weighed down by a sense of guilt. People looking for the person who can not only forgive us, but help us realize that we are forgiven. And there will probably be some who've been hurt by the action of others, or who simply lack self-esteem, and are looking for that Jesus who offers unconditional love. There may be some who are suffering from a sense of hopelessness and are looking for the Jesus who can offer hope and meaning in their life. I could go on. There are many different reasons why we might look to Jesus. Some good, some not so good. And if there's one thing in the current age that I would caution against, it's the danger of looking for a Jesus who's made in our image. A Jesus who supports our own particular view, confirms our prejudices. It's the kind of Jesus that you'll find if you start looking for isolated verses in the Bible that appear to support your view, rather than considering the message that comes from the Bible as a whole. Now that's really a sermon in itself, and I don't want to dwell on it today, but very quickly let me suggest, if you're looking for a Jesus who favors your type of person over others, if you're looking for a Jesus who demands justice without mercy, if you're looking for a Jesus who gives rules to live by rather than the simple rule of love, then you're unlikely to encounter the real Jesus. You see, whoever Mary was, whatever it was that brought her to Jesus, that was only the start of a journey in which she discovered that Jesus is so much more than she could ever have imagined. It's the same for us. We need to be ready to make that journey. We need to be ready to be surprised by him time and time again. We need to be ready to discover the fullness of who Jesus is. So I leave us with the question, are we ready to make that journey?